There is a depth of inner integration so rare, so precise, that most people will spend their entire lives brushing up against it without ever fully arriving. And the few who do arrive, they describe the result the same way every single time, like suddenly seeing the strings behind the puppet show, like watching every room you walk into from above, like hearing what people mean, not just what they say. Carl Jung identified this state as the final stage of anima integration, a point he associated with the figure of Sophia, Greek for wisdom. And yes, it sounds like the most powerful destination a human being can reach through the individuation process. But here is the part nobody tells you. Jung also said this stage has a dark twin, a shadow that follows wisdom like a curse. And if you are not careful, if you are not deeply, intentionally careful, that wisdom does not set you free. It traps you in a cage made entirely of your own perception. So what exactly happens at this stage of integration? And more importantly, why did Jung warn us about it? Let us start at the beginning, because you cannot understand the danger without first understanding the gift. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the inner world of the human psyche. He believed that buried beneath our conscious minds were layers of symbolic energy, ancient patterns he called archetypes, that shaped everything from our dreams to our deepest fears. And one of the most important archetypal systems he identified was the anima and animus. The anima is the feminine soul image inside a man. The animus is the masculine soul image inside a woman. These are not literal. They are psychological forces, inner figures. And Jung believed that the entire journey of psychological maturity was, in large part, about learning to integrate these figures, learning to stop projecting them onto other people and start owning them as parts of yourself. Now here is where it gets interesting. Jung described the integration of the anima as a four-stage process. Each stage represents a deeper, more complex relationship with the inner feminine. The first stage he called Eve. This is the most basic form. A man at this stage projects the anima entirely onto women around him. He sees women as either pure and nurturing or threatening and cold. He cannot see them as whole human beings because he has not yet met the whole human being inside himself. The second stage is Helen. This stage, the projected figure becomes more idealized, more romantic. There is passion here, desire, but it is still a projection. The man is still chasing something outside himself that actually lives within him. The third stage is Mary. This is where spirituality enters the picture. The inner feminine is no longer just about romance or nurturing. She becomes something sacred, something that points toward meaning, toward depth, toward the divine. This is a significant step inward, but it is the fourth stage, the final stage, that is the most extraordinary and the most dangerous. This is the Sophia Stage, and Sophia, in Greek, means wisdom. Now it is important to note something here, because this is where a lot of Jungian content oversimplifies. For women, the inner journey works differently. A woman integrates the animus, the inner masculine. And the animus moves through its own four stages: physical power, romantic initiative, the word or intellect, and finally the mediator, a figure who bridges the conscious self and the deep unconscious. Not wisdom as a noun, but wisdom as a living connection to something larger. The symbols are different for men and women, but the destination is the same: a direct, undistorted line between who you consciously are and the deep archetypal intelligence that lives beneath the surface of the mind. At the Sophia stage, the inner feminine is no longer a projection at all. She has been fully integrated into the conscious self. She is no longer something out there that you chase or worship. She is part of how you see, how you feel, how you understand the world. And this matters, because the entire goal of individuation is precisely this: to stop being driven by the unconscious, to start seeing reality without the fog of your own unexamined projections. When your personal complexes are no longer distorting your perception of others, you begin to see people as they actually are, not as symbols of your own unresolved story. Jung associated this with the development of the intuition function, a direct knowing that goes beyond what logic alone can reach. This is not book knowledge. This is not a high IQ score. This is something far older and far deeper, and this is the gift. But as Carl Jung knew very well, every gift has a cost, and the cost of this one is extraordinarily high. Think about what it actually means to see this clearly, to perceive what most people cannot perceive, to understand emotional dynamics that others are completely unconscious of. At first, it might feel like an advantage, and in many ways it is. But then reality starts to hit, and it hits hard. Because here is what nobody talks about. This level of perceptual clarity is exhausting. Jung used the concept of psychological differentiation to describe what happens when a person's inner functions, intuition, feeling, thinking, sensation, become properly separated from the unconscious muddle they usually live in. Before this, you react, you project, you see what your wounds want you to see. After this, you perceive, you see what is actually there, and you cannot unknow it. Over time, that clarity creates a very specific kind of loneliness. Jung described it as the individual's struggle against the collective, against the mass man, the crowd moving through life on autopilot, governed by social scripts nobody consciously agreed to. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. When you step outside that fog, you become something the crowd has no easy name for. Consider a composite profile that captures this dynamic very precisely. Imagine someone who has gone through years of deep inner work, regardless of gender, someone who has genuinely engaged with the individuation process in the way Jung described. They have journaled, analyzed their dreams, sat with therapists, confronted their shadow, traced their projections back to their roots. They have done the work, and the result is a quality of perception that is genuinely different from what most people experience. They can sense when a colleague is performing confidence to mask insecurity. They can hear the shame underneath someone's anger. They can see the relational pattern before anyone else in the room has registered that a pattern exists. And here is what happens. They start to feel like a stranger in every room they enter. Surface-level conversations become impossible to sustain. Small talk feels like a foreign language. They sit at family dinners and watch the patterns play out like a script they have memorized, while nobody else knows they are reading from it. They try to say something honest, something that points to the actual dynamic in the room, and it goes quiet. People look at them like they broke the rules of a game nobody admitted they were playing, and slowly, quietly, they start to withdraw, not out of arrogance, out of exhaustion, out of the grief of being perpetually unseen while seeing everything. And here is the piece of this that really gets me. They are not wrong. That is what makes it so brutal. They are not misreading the room. The patterns they see are real. The dynamics they are picking up on exist. But accurate perception with nowhere to land, with no one who can receive it and reflect it back, that is not power. That is isolation with extra steps. This is psychological isolation, and it is one of Jung's most important warnings about the Sophia Stage. Not because wisdom is bad, but because wisdom without the right container, without the right emotional structure around it, becomes a prison. But isolation is not even the most dangerous outcome Jung identified. There is something worse, something that lives right on the border between enlightenment and destruction. Jung called it psychological inflation, and this is where things get genuinely dark. Psychological inflation happens when a person begins to identify with the archetype rather than simply integrating it. Instead of saying, "I have access to wisdom," they begin to believe, "I am wisdom." Instead of saying, "I can see clearly," they start to feel, "I alone can see clearly." Instead of experiencing insight as a gift they steward, they begin to experience it as a proof of their superiority. And once that shift happens, something very specific and very dangerous starts to occur. The wisdom that was meant to serve connection starts to be used as a weapon. Jung wrote extensively about this. He saw it in his own patients, and if we are being completely honest, he saw echoes of it in himself. He described the inflated individual as someone who begins to believe they are the bearer of absolute truth, that their perception of reality is not just one valid perspective, but the perspective, the correct one, the final one. And anyone who disagrees with them is simply not evolved enough to understand. Jung had a very specific name for this. He called it the mana personality. Mana is a term he borrowed from anthropology, meaning a kind of supernatural power or authority. What Jung observed in himself and in his patients was that when a person integrates a major archetype, like the wise old man or the great mother, the ego can become intoxicated by that encounter. It starts to believe it does not just have access to wisdom, it believes it is wisdom. It carries supernatural authority that ordinary people cannot possess. Jung was very direct. This inflation is not mastery. It is a sign that the ego has been swallowed by the archetype rather than integrating it. The archetype has taken the wheel, while the ego believes it has finally arrived. And once that shift happens, it is fast. The mana personality becomes convinced. It can see exactly what is wrong with everyone around them. They understand the other person's psychology better than that person understands themselves. And because they believe this so completely, they stop listening. They stop being curious. They already know. And when you already know, you are no longer in a relationship. You are delivering a verdict. Consider another narrative illustration, a composite example based on observed relational and therapeutic patterns. Think of a man who has spent years in therapy and personal development. He has genuinely grown. But somewhere in that growth, something shifted. He began to see his psychological understanding not just as a tool, but as a rank, something that placed him above ordinary conflict. And now, when he has a conflict with someone he loves, he does not say, "I am hurting." He says, "Let me explain to you why you are behaving this way based on your attachment style." He has turned empathy into analysis. He has turned connection into diagnosis. And the people closest to him start to feel not seen, but examined, not loved, but categorized, not in a relationship with a human being, but in a session with a therapist who has already made up his mind about the outcome before they walked through the door. This is the trap of the Sophia Stage. The wisdom is real. The perception is real. But when the ego wraps itself around that wisdom, when the inflated self uses insight as a shield instead of a bridge, it destroys everything it touches. And here is the part that makes it even more complicated. The person in this state is often completely sincere. They genuinely believe they are helping. They genuinely believe they are seeing clearly. And in many ways, they are. The insight itself is not wrong, but the way they are wielding it, the arrogance baked into the delivery, the refusal to hold space for the other person's experience as equally valid, that is the corruption. That is where the gift becomes a wound. Now here is where a lot of psychological content gets it wrong. Most videos describe the problem and offer a clean solution in 3 steps. But the Sophia stage does not work like that. This is not a problem you solve once. It is a tension you manage for life. The same qualities that make this perceptual clarity so powerful are the exact same qualities that make inflation so seductive. The question is not how to see less. The question is how to hold what you see with enough humility that it stays a gift instead of a weapon. Jung was very clear about what causes this corruption. It comes from incomplete shadow integration. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is not just the dark side of yourself. It is every part of yourself that you have not yet consciously owned. The parts pushed into the unconscious because they felt too shameful or too contradictory to your self-image. And for someone deep in the individuation process, the shadow almost always contains the origin story of the perception itself. Modern trauma-informed psychology says that hypervigilance and extreme perceptual sensitivity often develop as a response to early instability. You learn to read people because at some point it was necessary for your safety. And that framework describes something real. But Jung himself was less focused on what caused a trait and more interested in what it was pointing toward. He called this the teleological view, the idea that the psyche moves purposefully. He believed that highly attuned individuals, particularly those he categorized as the introverted intuitive psychological type, are often simply born oriented inward, born with unusual sensitivity to the invisible dynamics beneath the surface of things. The individuation process does not create that sensitivity. It refines it and teaches the person to use it without being consumed by it. So the more precise Jungian framing is this: whether the perceptual gift began as a survival skill, an innate type trait, or both, it carries real power. But if the shadow around its origins is not integrated, if the wound or the compensation underneath the gift is not owned, then the wisdom that grew out of it will be serving the wrong master. So how does a person actually escape this trap? How does someone with genuine Sophia-level awareness avoid the twin pitfalls of isolation and inflation? Jung's answer was both simple and extraordinarily difficult. He called it conscious participation, and it requires a complete reversal of the ego's instinct. The ego wants to be above. It wants to observe from a safe distance, to be the one who sees without being seen, who knows without being known. Conscious participation demands the exact opposite. It demands that you descend back into the mess, back into uncertainty, back into relationships where you do not always know the outcome, where the other person is allowed to be complex and contradictory and sometimes flat out wrong without you needing to dissect why. Conscious participation means using your perception in service of connection, not superiority. It means saying, I notice this dynamic between us. I might be wrong. What do you think? Instead of saying, I can clearly see what you are doing here, it means holding your insight loosely, as a hypothesis, not as a verdict. It means being willing to be surprised, being willing to be wrong, being willing to find that your perception, however refined, is still just one window into a very large, very complex reality. And it means being willing to be seen, not just seeing, being seen. One of the quieter symptoms of the inflated Sophia stage is that the individual becomes very comfortable analyzing others and very uncomfortable being analyzed themselves. They keep the perception flowing outward, always outward, never inward. And that one-way dynamic slowly suffocates every relationship it touches. Conscious participation breaks that by demanding reciprocity. You bring your clarity and you bring your vulnerability. You admit that your perception is a gift and not a throne. And here is something beautiful that happens when you do this. When you bring this level of wisdom into service of genuine connection rather than a private throne, something shifts in how people experience you. You stop being the unsettling stranger who sees too much. You start being the rare, safe person who sees clearly and still chooses to stay, who sees your defenses and does not weaponize them, who sees your wounds and does not categorize them. This is what Jung ultimately called the integrated empath, and it is one of the rarest human configurations that exists. The integrated empath is not someone who has transcended feeling. They feel everything deeply, but they have built a container strong enough to hold it without being swept away. They embody what some modern therapists describe as love with boundaries, not love that looks away from hard things, and not love that uses hard things as leverage. Love that sees, holds, and releases. Love that can witness your pain without needing to fix it, diagnose it, or use it as evidence for a theory. This is what the Sophia Stage looks like when it is genuinely integrated. Not a prophet on a mountain, not a wise woman sitting above the crowd, shaking her head at how little they understand, but someone fully in the mess of life, fully in the complexity of real relationships, bringing their perception to bear not as a weapon or a wall, but as what Jung ultimately believed wisdom was always meant to be: cultural medicine. Think about that phrase. Not personal superiority, not spiritual status. Medicine, something that heals. Jung believed that individuals who navigated the Sophia Stage with integrity, those who survived the inflation, did the shadow work, and re-engaged with conscious participation, had something rare to offer the world, not as gurus, but as people in ordinary daily life who make others feel more seen, more coherent, more human, simply by being present. There is a third composite case worth exploring here. Picture someone who has been through everything described in this video: the isolation, the inflation, the period of diagnosing everyone around them while calling it compassion, and then, through honest feedback from people who loved them enough to say something, and their own willingness to sit with that rather than analyze it away, something cracked open. They realized that all of their seeing had become a defense against being seen, that every sharp insight they offered about someone else was quietly designed to keep the focus off them. That realization was uncomfortable, but it was the beginning of something new. The awareness did not disappear, but it lost its weaponized quality and became something softer and more useful. They stopped arriving in conversations already knowing. They started arriving open, and the people around them could feel the difference immediately, because there is something unmistakable about being in the presence of someone who sees you clearly and is still genuinely curious about you. And this is the final, essential lesson, the one Jung returned to throughout his life's work. The deepest wisdom does not isolate you. It connects you, not because you pretend not to see, not because you dumb yourself down, but because you understand at the core of yourself that perception without compassion is just surveillance. That insight without humility is just arrogance with better vocabulary, and that the most powerful thing a deeply aware person can do is not announce what they see, but create the conditions in which others can begin to see it themselves. This is the moment Jung was pointing toward all along, not the moment when the aware person stands back and watches the chess game from above, but the moment when they sit back down at the board, look the other player in the eyes, and say, "Let us play this through together," because they have realized something that the inflated version of themselves could not grasp. The game is not more interesting from a distance. It is more interesting from inside it. So where does this leave you? If you are watching this video, you have probably felt some version of this. The loneliness of seeing patterns others miss. The frustration of articulating something real and watching the room go quiet. The quiet suspicion, at least once, that your perception made you different, better, more evolved. That is not a character flaw. It is just what happens when genuine growth meets an ego that has not quite caught up yet. But Jung is asking you to go one step further, Take all of that hard-won clarity and bring it back down. Stop using it as a reason to stay above the mess and start using it to go deeper into the mess. Because wisdom is not a destination, it is a practice, and this stage of integration is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of the hardest and most rewarding part, the part where you learn to be powerful and humble at the same time, perceptive and open at the same time, clear-eyed and tender at the same time. That, according to Jung, is what it means to be fully human. Not to transcend the darkness, but to integrate it. Not to rise above others, but to walk alongside them, more deeply, more honestly, more wisely than before. And in doing so, to become not just a person who has achieved something remarkable inside themselves, but someone whose presence actually changes the air in every room they enter. That is the promise of the Sophia Stage when you get it right. The Sophia Stage is extraordinary, it is real, and it is genuinely dangerous if you do not handle it with care. But when you do, when you survive the inflation and do the shadow work and choose conscious participation over comfortable distance, you access something incredibly rare, a kind of wisdom that does not just benefit you, it benefits everyone you love. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.